Even though Lorcana is only 4 sets deep, I have seen a few cards that all featured in tippy top meta game decks that are now nowhere to be seen. Almost like they've fallen off the face of the competitive metagame. So I thought it would be fun to look at some of those cards, the story behind them, and what caused them to be replaced. Let's go. Now it pains me to say this because I've tried to make Aladdin work so many times. His daring exploit power is very strong. Whenever he banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore and your opponent loses 2 lore. That is an essential 4 lore swing, nothing to be sniffed at, make no mistake about it. And in the set 1 metagame, this was a 4 of in the best deck in format, Ruby Amethyst. It kinda helped that the little Aladdin that you would shift off was actually pretty decent too, since when you would play him, your opponent would lose 1 lore also. It's not all sunshine and rainbows for the heroic outlaw though. Since he was only 5/5, the chances of you getting a banish in and then immediately not getting banished on your opponent's next turn was pretty low. Meaning in that exact scenario, he was an essential turn 5 4 lore quest, which doesn't sound as appealing. Good, but not meta game breaking. Some Ruby Amethyst lists were known to play Lifu or Shield of Virtue at the time as well, meaning you could in theory swing twice in the same turn to remove 2 threats at the same time, boosting your lore. Or you could get a cheeky challenge in and then leave him ready, safe from your opponent's other characters. The big problem for Aladdin though was as soon as Ruby got more and more toys to play with, Aladdin quickly fell by the wayside. Even with massive buffs like Go the Distance to ready him up again for an easy second challenge, or Queen of Hearts to draw cards when you challenge, or Shere Khan so you get lore when you challenge, building a deck around challenging just wasn't really viable. There were just other Ruby cards that were easier and more straightforward to use, and they just booted Aladdin out of the metagame. Like Lady Tremaine, who didn't have such a drastic lore swing as Aladdin, but did accomplish a similar thing by just removing something from play. This issue got compounded when Madame Medusa was released too. And while Maui was in the same set as Aladdin, when Ruby had backup from the ladies previously mentioned, Maui could take on much more of the challenging load on his own. And if players did want to help Maui out with some extra challenging power, they could play Scar Vicious Cheetah, who wasn't reliant on shift to get into play and could challenge in the same turn since it had rush, but thanks to Daddy Isn't Here to Save You, he could remove 2 targets too very reliably, whilst also having more strength than Aladdin. And finally, Goofy, the super goof himself, I think puts the nail in the coffin for Aladdin, since Goofy is a 4-drop with rush that gains 2 lore whenever it challenges something. This is disastrous for Aladdin, since Goofy comes in a turn earlier than Aladdin does, generates lore straight away, all without needing shift as well. Meaning Goofy always has an immediate impact on the game. This means I'm not sure if we will ever see the heroic outlaw ever again. Blue Robin Hood. The unrivaled archer saw a ton of play in Sapphire lists back in the day. Solid 4/4 stats that gain evasive on your turn, meaning you now have a way to deal with evasives in the Sapphire deck, which traditionally you didn't often have. You could even draw a card when you put it into play if you had less cards in hand than your opponents. And quest for 2 lore too. This meant Robin Hood had a solid place in decks, sitting behind Hades' Infernal Schema and in front of Belle Strange But Beautiful on the Ink curve. But at a very high 6 cost, Robin Hood time in the metagame wasn't set to last long, since with all the ink acceleration that Sapphire was about to receive and the new cards too, that 6 cost just wasn't gonna add up. First up, Cruella de Vil would come in as a much cheaper way for Sapphire to tackle evasive characters, so that one part of Robin Hood's USP was obliterated. The drawing cards part of Robin Hood would also become obsolete, since the Porpsicle core of Judy Hopps, Porpsicle, Nick Wilde and Hiriam Flavisham would allow Sapphire players to draw a ton of cards at a scary rate, all non-conditionally. And then the power level of other cards would just start to catch up to the unrivaled Archer. For example, it is very hard to justify playing a Robin Hood over another 6-drop like Gaston for example, who would quest for free and let you grab a card from the top 3 cards of your deck when you put them into play every time without having to rely on having less cards in hand than your opponent. Even the 5-drop Maleficent, who quested for free and had 6 willpower, was probably a better card to play. And now with all the Turbo Ink Sapphire can pump out, Hades' Infernal Schema is so much easier to get into play. Big Boy Tamatoa is a scary mid to late game option and then the bell threat constantly just becomes a threat easier. But I think the real nail in the coffin was Lucky Dime. While it does cost 1 ink more, its ability to just catapult a Sapphire player into the lead is insane, especially by targeting a Bell or a Tamatoa. Honestly, it gets out of hand. An Aerial fits into this strategy nicely too, meaning poor old Robin Hood will have to just sit back and watch from the binder. Not all their Cheshire Cat started off as a solid include in almost all Emerald decks, back when aggro was a serious force. It fit the 3 cost curve nicely, as a 2 lore option that would banish the challenging character if it ever got banished in a challenge. This would help reduce your opponent's threats while you request big and rack up early game lore from cards like Lilo, Flynn Rider and later on Cusco. But as aggro started to favour Amethyst due to Pinocchio and the Bounce Core and Befuddle, Cheshire Cat started to look a lot less attractive. Cards like Cursed Merfolk made Cheshire Cat a lot less of a great play, since it would offer up a similar level of disruption if it got challenge banished and would come in as early as turn 1. Cloud Kicker would also give Cheshire Cat a run for its money, by allowing you to return a character to the player's hand with 2 strength or less when you played it, giving it an instantaneous effect on the game, instead of having to rely on your opponent to challenge you. But there are 2 main massive reasons why I think Cheshire Cat isn't seen anymore. The first one is Prince John. I Sentence You allows you to draw a card every time your opponent has to discard a card. This combos stupidly well with cards like Sudden Chill, Cursed Merfolk and Hypnotize. And on top of that, Prince John also has 1 strength, which funnily enough is a strict upgrade on Cheshire Cat, and it even has Ward, so your opponent can't just spam Brawl or Sisu to remove it from play, all while questing for 2 as well. And on top of that, Prince John pairs stupidly well with Medusa too, who is also a 3-drop might I say, but can sing songs twice, meaning she can sing Sudden Chill twice, forcing your opponent to discard 2 cards from their hand, while you draw 2 if you have Prince John out. Or you can sing Strength for Rage and Fire, or Let the Storm Rage On to remove threats from your opponent's board more aggressively. Cheshire Cat does none of these things. And in the most recent set, Diablo's come out as a 3 cost too, letting you draw a card whenever your opponent does, while Diablo is exerted. This was strong enough to make Emerald discard decks drop Prince John altogether and go to a Bucky Floodborn engine that forces your opponent to discard a card whenever you play a Floodborn. And Cheshire Cat is not a Floodborn. So if Prince John was already power crept out of the game, that leaves Cheshire Cat, well, in another stratosphere. Rafiki. Rafiki was a very solid card back in the set 1 meta, a 3 cost 3/3 stat card with Rush, which would allow Amethyst to try and combat the aggro decks that would often try and capitalise on Amethyst's slow tendency to get out the gates. And with Ruby Amethyst being the best deck at format at the time, it was not uncommon to see Rafiki running amok in those decks. However, Rafiki is probably the saddest story in this video, because there is literally no reason to run Rafiki anymore. He has been dead and buried well and truly. By himself, funnily enough, because if you're after a very early board presence, the 1-drop Rafiki actually does that really well, with Challenger 3. Peter Pan Shadow comes in the turn later, but it gives your Rush characters evasive, which is nice, has Rush himself, and has 2 lore too. However, the face of Amethyst decks, the Bounce Core, has just obliterated Rafiki, since Madam Mim Snake has the same stats as Rafiki, but comes in a turn earlier, to give you an early game presence faster. But Madam Mim Fox is literally an upgrade to Rafiki in every single way. Same ink cost at 3. Inkable instead of uninkable. 1 extra strength. And has the benefit of allowing you to return 1 card to your hand when you play it. Allowing you to heal damage or return exerted characters back to your hand so they're safe. This means Rafiki is a true relic of the past who we'll never see ever again. Cerberus. Now Cerberus saw a ton of play in the set 1 metagame. Metal was one of the strongest colours in my opinion, and Cerberus became a linchpin of those decks. It was a very solid 6 cost 5/6 stat monster, and while it was played exclusively because of those stats, to be fair are very high, allowing Cerberus to absorb grab your swords and smashes while being able to be a solid challenging threat too. However, as new sets came out, it started to get quickly phased out. Shift Cinderella was the queen of set 2 metagame, coming in a turn before Cerberus on the curve, but it had resist -2, making it infinitely more tanky, since it would just bob and weave all kinds of minor damage. And its Singing Sword power would allow her to challenge ready characters, which would add a whole new dimension to metal decks. And we're even starting to see this Simba creep into decks, with its high stats and powers to give it more control over the game. But the real linchpin for Cerberus is that Metal has two of the top most meta-defining cards in the game, both 5-drops as well. Beast and Robin Hood. Beast lets you draw an extra card if it has 0 damage on it at the start of your turn, which is an insane amount of card draw. And if your opponent even thinks about damaging it, your its strength goes to astronomical levels. And Robin Hood comes as early as turn 3 and immediately affects the game by grabbing Lore if it KOs something in a challenge, and you get to draw 1 card if it ever gets banished in a challenge too. And both of these cards see a ton of play across many different decks, meaning Cerberus has gone extinct. If you like the video and subscribe. I'm going to put out a lot more Lorcana content, so I hope to see you all around soon. Real quick, I have to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Dragon Shield. They make the best accessories in the game, and if you want to get your hands on some and save yourself some money, click the link down there and use my code BERT to get 5% off, and it helps me out too. Let's get back to the video.